Oh, hello, yeah. Well, hurrah, it's Sunday. Pretty warm, pretty sticky. Good weather to be arrested in, I would suggest, yes. Not really quite sure what the government's going to do with large numbers of people who've been arrested, bearing in mind they left loads of other people behind, vicious terrorists that they are, that weren't arrested. I think they're going to find it hard to throw the book at people that were arrested, and after pledging that they weren't going to allow people to just not be arrested. So, well, good. I do like a government that shoots itself in the foot. I do especially like a Labour Party that shoots itself in the foot. You bring in poor laws, and by God, they're going to show you up. Still, never mind, that's one for Yvette Cooper. May she sleep well, knowing full well that she's managed to tackle those awful, awful, awful Palestinian-style terrorists that there are. Anyway, today I want to talk about education, which is something I vaguely know things about. There was this very long piece yesterday in the Telegraph with Nick Gibb, who was a very, very long-standing and, given some of the education ministers he had to serve with, very probably very, very long-suffering education minister. He was there for the duration, effectively, of the whole 14 years when everything became wonderful in this country. You may recall that, up until last July when everything became bad. Anyway, it's this, how progressive teaching destroyed our education system and threatens to return under Labour. In the new book, ex-Tory Minister Nick Gibb describes his war against child-led learning and why he fears the ideology is making a comeback. Yes, indeed, ideology, very bad thing, isn't it? Yes, and as Nick explains in the piece, Conservatives are just pragmatic people. They don't have an ideology, cough, cough. Which obviously I'm going to completely disagree with here. It's worth reading this. This is probably the key bit from the entire very long piece, if you can get past the paywall. From 45 years of active political engagement, I've come to believe that ideology is at the root of most problems in public service delivery. By ideology, I mean the guiding principles which become orthodoxies within a sector and about which it becomes unthinkable to ask questions or challenge. This is true of almost all government departments, from Treasury to Transport, Housing to Health. Such ideologies often never defer to evidence, which is why they inevitably drive failure. Okay then, the problem is, of course, with Nick that he was a very ideologically driven person in a very ideologically driven government, the government that didn't believe in public service delivery. Which has led to all sorts of problems. Yeah, you end up with government ministers like Priti Patel being in charge of overseas aid when they don't believe in overseas aid, and you end up with government ministers in charge of, well, basically trying their bestest to, hopefully make things a lot better. I might sort of point to various government ministers with enormously long track records of just costing the public billions through botched attempts with various things. I'm not going to name them. I'm sure you can, yeah. Think probation and those kind of things. Anyway, yes. But the problem with Nick's piece, of course, is that, well, it is a bit light on evidence. And some of the things that he cites as evidence of how well he was doing are a bit iffy at best. There is this, for example, there is this table, which is basically your kind of PISA, their international league tables between different countries, and you tend to get these very city-states, one might say, like Singapore and Hong Kong, that always come out near the top because they just hothouse their kids in things like languages and maths and science, yeah? We've tried doing that in the past in this country. It works to a certain extent, but only to a certain extent, which I'll come on to. But the problem with this, you may notice, is that effectively Britain, between England, as it is here, between 2016 and 2020, just flatlined. And there's a problem, of course, because once you've reached about 99% literacy, you can't go anywhere else with it. Okay, you can tinker a little bit with people that don't read so good at the bottom, but effectively there's a core component of people who will never learn to read for a number of reasons. If you're concerned about that, go away and have a think about it. Okay, there are some people that will never learn to read, just like there are some people that will never speak. It's those kind of things, okay? So it can't be done. But the weird thing about this particular thing, in terms of measuring ourselves among the people, is that dip you notice at the beginning, because that was during Tony Blair's time. And one of the things that Tony Blair did an enormous big push on was literacy rates, which improved enormously internally in the UK. So I'm not quite sure there what happened with the data in terms of us dipping down and then coming back again. It just strikes me as iffy at best. And again, it is iffy. PISA tables are very, very iffy, and we get, oh my God, we dropped from 9th to 17th in science. Yeah, there's a good chance the year later, because they'll change the measurements and come on to that as a notion, that it'll be back there again. It's a very odd thing to think that we have to pit ourselves against a bunch of kids studying maths in Singapore. I don't know, I can't see the value. And again, we'll come on to that one. The other problem with what he's citing is the notion of schools improving, and it's always a very odd thing to do. Okay, now when Ofsted first came in around, let's say, ballpark figure, the 2000. Let's just use that as a ballpark figure. Okay, it's a bit before that, but anyway, ballpark figure, year 2000. Right? Okay, the Ofsted inspections were completely different from how they are today. So if you've got 20 years of data on a school, each of the individual Ofsted inspections that school has done will have been different. They will be measured on pretty much completely different things. Sometimes the emphasis, it was back in the beginning, was on GCSE scores, and now it isn't. It's on loads of other things. So it becomes amazingly hard to actually say what's going on with any individual school across it. And you may notice the number of schools that are good or outstanding. And there's a problem there as well, because under Gove, Mr. Gove didn't want to have schools just coasting. He didn't want them to coast, so he got rid of the kind of satisfactory, the middle one between good and bad, and the middle one. He got rid of that. So you either were good or outstanding, or you were inadequate, or you were going to be shot. Right? Those were basically your four options. But this is a true story. When he was questioned about this in Parliament as to what his definition of good was, he said it was above average. And the MP that was questioning him had to state to him that, in fact, his grasp of statistics wasn't very good, because, of course, you can't have the majority of schools being better than average. That's a statistical impossibility. Still, never mind, that's Mr. Gove. And yes, schools have got better and better and better. But what have they got better in? Well, they've got better in whatever the government has demanded that they do, because lots of their funding comes from that. Okay, that's the way that those things work. They're a business, and you set that business targets, and they will meet that target, which is great. So we have all of these kids that come out, hooray, with loads of qualifications. And, inevitably, Nick Gibb here sort of cites the Michaela School with lovely and Miss Fluffy, or whatever her Twitter handle is, Catherine Bassing, and saying about why can't all schools be like that? Well, okay, let's imagine that they are. Let's imagine that all schools get the kind of maths and English and science results that the Michaela does. The problem is that you wouldn't then get loads and loads of kids with very, very high scores. That isn't the way that we do exams in this country. One of the things that a lot of people, general public, don't know is that if you had a year where every single child that sat a GCSE maths got a score of 95 or above, not all of those kids would get very high scores. What they do is they would rearrange the scores so that someone that got 95% would fail, and someone that got 99 or 100% would get a grade 9. That's the way those things work. That's the way the system is weighted each year. You have to have a group of people that fail. It's built into the system. So what are you going to do about those kids? And, just on a broader level, which is where the whole ideology comes in, you can say, we just have to have more and more better qualified kids. But where are these jobs that these kids are going to go into? We have, ideologically speaking, Nick Gibb and his ideology. We've had 40 years of neoliberalism, which has produced very, very highly educated workers for the system. And the system doesn't want highly educated workers, because graduates now have to take jobs that, when I was 18, would have been given to people with GCSEs. That's the nature of it, right? Okay, I probably hit just about the last year when you could come out with A-levels back in 1981 and go into a vaguely appropriate job. But those days are gone. And yet we still, ideologically speaking, live in the 1990s, and we have to get more kids to get more exam passes, because then they'll just go into a good job. Well, there need to be good jobs. There needs to be a buoyant economy, and unfortunately for Nick, all of the other things that his government was doing, education notwithstanding, haven't given us a buoyant economy. They've given us a totally stagnant economy, because that's neoliberalism for you, an ideology that Nick is more than happy to champion. So great. We end up with that classic sort of like, newspeak version of overproduction of elites. We've got vast numbers of very highly educated people, and they're not being used very well. They end up in the world's worst, most menial, useless jobs. And loads of kids in education right now know full well the way that system works and what incentive is for them to do well in the system, knowing full well, especially your classic white working class, here's all them lot, yeah, who know full well that the system is rigged against them. Until we have a properly meritocratic system that just equips kids to be, reasonable human beings, rather than simply being able to square the hypotenuse or whatever it might be in terms of very, very useless things in maths, or indeed in science, or indeed in English. It's very, very, very little use to be able to necessarily know lots of the things you need to know for English GCSE to get a good score. It has no use in people's lives. I constantly field questions from young people that ask me, especially about maths, is well, what use is that? And the answer is, well, if you get the GCSE, then you'll be equipped to go on to do the A-level. And if you get the A-level, you'll be equipped to go on to do the degree. Because all of our education system is built backwards. We have a problem with our whole ideological system in itself in the British education system. I would like to see an education system that produces well-rounded human beings, not simply kids that can sit at a desk for a long period of time in a blazer. I don't see the value. But of course, if you're a Conservative government minister, what you want is somebody that can sit and obey orders at a desk, metaphorically or otherwise, as an adult. That's the key thing. I personally am not interested in that. But, you can call me an ideologue on that basis. That's fine. But one of the two of us is actually very, very proactively interested in the real live lives of the kids that I teach. Nick is interested in the spreadsheet. Anyway, do have a glorious day. If you can do stay in the shade like my pussycat. Oh, yes. And, have a think about those ideological things. We are presented with this the entire time. People like me are ideologues. People like Nick are simply pragmatic individuals that can see the world as it truly is. Well, if that was the case after 45 years, the world wouldn't look like this, would it? And we certainly wouldn't be arresting people en masse in Parliament who are a bit upset at genocide. Do have a good one.